Og tak for, at jeg kommer hit til Sverige og præsenterer et dansk bolag. Som nemt, så kommer præsentationen ske på engelsk, men frågor bra på svenska. Tak så mycket. Yes, I'm going to present ViroGates, and we're a company which is within the medtech area, and we're raising capital at the moment, both with an offer in both Denmark and in Sweden, to intensify our commercial rollout throughout Europe. This is the agenda for the day, and I'd be happy to elaborate on any questions afterwards. The transaction that we are conducting at the moment is for a share denominated in Danish kroner at 91 kroner per share. So we're going to list in Copenhagen. This means a pre-money valuation of the entity of roughly 200 million Danish kroner, and we're going out with an offering of 60 to 75 million Danish. And we have covered 53.7 million of that by ways of cornerstone investors that have pre-committed capital to the IPO. And that includes both Danish and Swedish investors. So you can also see the offer range in terms of the number of shares. The focus of the capital raise is going to be on our intensified commercial rollout throughout primarily the European Union initially, and to follow also the US and other markets. We're also going to strengthen our product development. I'm going to get a little bit back to that. And then along the way, we'll also generate additional clinical documentation. And last but not least, also secure a continuous global patent coverage. I'm also going to get back to the patent position a little later. The 2020 objectives that we have also listed in our prospectus, which is available at the booth afterwards, is to have at least 40 paying hospital customers by the end of 2020, and also to be cash flow positive. So that means that this is the capital raise. We're not conducting anything else. And as you can see, we're primarily using the capital for the commercial execution. So it's not a kind of a biotech offering whereby we're doing a pipeline. We have actually commercial products in the market, and that's going to be what drives the capital increase. We have a subscription period which is running already until the 20th of June. We have a selling agent here in Sweden, Avanza Bank. The settlement date is 25th and the first day of trading 26th, and as mentioned on Nasdaq First North in Denmark, and the ticker is Viro. This is a short overview of who we are. We're a company which operate in the acute medical field. So we're into what is known as the triage or risk stratification of patients. And we're primarily helping the physicians to discharge the patients earlier than they can do currently, and thereby freeing up space in the overcrowded acute medical care units, and also helping the patients of not acquiring hospital-acquired infections and so on and so forth. We have the first clinical customers, i.e. the routine users, established. And we have several trial users in the European markets, and I'm also going to come back to that. Great market potential, both in the acute care sector where we're initially targeting, but also follow-on markets. We use our proprietary product line called Supanostic. We have a strong IP base around method of use patents for utilizing Supanostic for clinical use, and we have more than 500 peer-reviewed publications that support our clinical claims to date. We've tested more than 300,000 blood samples by now, so we absolutely know how our products works. We have regulatory approved products by ways of the CE-IVD, in vitro diagnostics directive, in Europe, and we also have registrations in various other markets such as India and Canada and the US to follow. And last but not least, we have a strong management team, also including our board of directors. The current challenges in this particular market is that the acute care medical units, they have what is known as overcrowding. Way too many patients that they can't really deal with. We know from our research that 2 out of 3 actually have a good prognosis. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can send all of them home, but at least if there's nothing to the contrary, we can actually discharge some of those patients and free up resources. We measure the activation of the immune system, and that's how we provide not a diagnosis, as you know, probably with CRP, for instance, infektionstallet, but a prognosis. So we are more long-term, what is going to happen to this patient? We can do this by measuring the level of inflammation in the body. So patients with a low suPAR, which is an acronym, this is a protein that we measure, they actually have a low risk and hence can be sent home earlier on than they can at present, because they don't necessarily have an urgent need of care. So we've conducted a large, actually the biggest to date intervention study in acute care involving 16,000 patients in Denmark, where we actually showed that when using suPAR as compared to a placebo group or not using suPAR, the patients stayed 6.5 hours less in the intensive care wards. So that's very important. We can calculate some savings based on that. And even if you do as you currently do in the acute medical care, suPAR always provides a better prognosis to the patients. Hence, this is probably going to be an add-on for most of the physicians, not necessarily a replacement for what they do. So we simply aid the physicians in discharging patients early on. This is a little bit complicated, but these are some of the research data that we have. And as you see, the red line, that's a prognosis of somebody with a very bad suPAR, a high suPAR. The risk of mortality, death, is actually 50% after 90 days. That's actually rare to see so high patients. We have one in about 10 in the acute medical wards. Whereas the bulk of the patients, many patients lie in the green area with a very good prognosis. And that's actually where our interest lies in discharging the patients early. In terms of the market size, we operate, as mentioned, initially in the acute care area in Europe. There are many patients. There are about 2.5 to 3% of the overall population comes into the acute care ward every year, and it's often the chronic comorbid patients, but large patient potentials both in Europe, North America, and the rest of the world, with a differentiated pricing, as I mentioned in the small letters at the bottom of the page. We also want to help the post-acute care, i.e. when the patients are dismissed into rehabilitation facilities. That's an important market, especially in the private healthcare sectors, where it's often covered by insurances, and we can also help out in that sector. In terms of the study that I just mentioned, we've calculated some savings based on that study, i.e. the 6.5 hours that we save in terms of the admission time. And if you look at the far left on the slide, you can see the savings in Denmark. So the green bars are the net savings, i.e. 87 million euros by ways of implementing suPAR. When you've actually paid for the product, then you can yield savings by ways of calculating the overall cost of a bed. And that is obviously much higher in Germany, as mentioned, also with high bed prices. But if you look at a country like Poland on the right-hand side here, even with lower bed costs, there's still substantial savings to be yielded in such markets. And the US, that goes without saying, with their high cost, is in the billions of euros in terms of savings. We also have follow-on markets that we're addressing. Later on, when we've put this into place in many acute care wards, we can target the GP physicians. That's a follow-on market because they need to be comfortable with being able to put the patients into the hospitals, but it's obviously a much bigger market because there are so many visitations done in the primary care sector, and that's an obvious follow-on market. We actually see that trend with some of the clinical customers that we have. They're trying to spread it out to their GPs to capture the patients even earlier on than the acute care wards. And then obviously the private health test, we see many of the big players like Amazon and so on venturing into the testing area, and that's going to drive also the private customers to acquire this technology, because it's a very adequate tool to measure even the healthy individuals by ways of the risk of acquiring lifestyle-related diseases such as cancers, type 2 diabetes, etc., etc. I.e., if you have a low suPAR, then the risk is lower, and if you change your lifestyle, you can actually improve your suPAR and get an adequate readout by ways of saying your risk of acquiring lifestyle-related diseases has lowered. This is our path into Europe. At present, we have clinical use in Denmark. We've established 10 accounts in Spain, and we are hoping to get even more there. And then we've also set up in Eastern Europe. And then we're going to roll that out throughout Europe by ways of a targeted plan, and that's what the IPO is addressing, the need to put more capital into driving this into the European markets. We primarily target the markets where point of care technology is currently high in use, and that's the Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. That's why we have the initial rollout there. When we have additional products later this year, we also have a product suite that caters for the more northern markets. In terms of our product offering, the initial product that we had was, where we did our initial research, was the ELISA product, as you can see up there. The newest product and the one that is in use in Spain and Eastern Europe and so on is the one in the middle, the suPARnostic Quick Triage. That's what is known as a lateral flow product, so it's quite easy to use. You put a drop of plasma into the well of a plastic device, and it's read in the reader after 20 minutes, and it gives a complete quantitative result. So that became available to us just at the entry of 2016, and that's also what we used for our intervention study, because it's a very quick and neat way to do a suPARnostic result. Then we have a pipeline product labeled suPARnostic Turbine Latex. It's a turbidimetric method. It means that it runs on big centralized instruments in the central labs in most of the hospitals. So the big players like Roche, Abbott, Siemens, and so on would be the providers of this technology, and we put our products into use in their platform systems. We expect to launch this later this year, actually in Q3, so it's fairly well advanced. In terms of our IP and patent position, I'm not going to list all of them, but the main patent families that we have are the ones listed up here. So those are method of use patents, as I mentioned. So we've taken them out when we've seen that we've proven that super was an adequate way to prognosticate the outcome in various diseases. And the most recent one we've filed is based on the ability to prognosticate in the emergency department, and that's we filed that with the UK authorities earlier this year. So we have adequate patent coverage for our claims. In terms of the management team, I'm the CEO of the company. I've been with the company for 7 years now. I have a history in both diagnostics and therapeutics within the life science sector. I'm a lawyer by training, and I also hold an MBA. I've been heading the business development function for ALK, and also been in smaller companies like Egalet. Then we have our CFO, Maj-Britt Dyvelgaard, who's been with the company for 10 years, and Dr. Jesper Olsen, who's actually a co-founder of the company. He's also with us as well as heading the research department at a Danish hospital. And our most recent addition to the operational team is Dr. Thomas Krarup, who's the VP of Sales and Marketing. He has a long tenure with big diagnostics company like Radiometer, Becton Dickinson, Roche, etc. So we have a good foundation. Then we have a board of directors consisting of very experienced individuals within the diagnostics and life science industry. Dr. Lars Kongsbach, who's the chairman, has 25 years of operational experience, lastly heading Exicon, which was acquired by QIAGEN. Speaking of QIAGEN, we have Bernd Uder, who was the chief commercial officer for QIAGEN, a big listed company. So he's very experienced in rolling out diagnostics throughout the world. Jørgen Thorvald, also a co-founder, a seasoned life science entrepreneur, and Lars Krogsgaard, who's also one of the main owners. He's an ex-Procuritas, so private equity individual. And in terms of the actual transaction, you can see a list pre the offering of our main shareholders. We have NP Louis Hansen APS, one of the founding family of Coloplast, Kim Ginnerup, who's also a seasoned entrepreneur within the life science area, and as I mentioned, Lars Krogsgaard, and a list of additional investors. We actually have about 40, so we're a little bit different than the typical biotechs where there's a lot of venture capital that has come in. We have just one share class prior to the IPO, and obviously also past the IPO. But we've been driving this without traditional venture capital. And then we have the list of the cornerstone investors, which include also the existing owners, as you can see, NP Louis Hansen. But one of the familiar names here in Sweden, LMK, is part of the cornerstone investors. We are also converting a debt as part of the transaction, and you can see how we come to the 53 million in pre-committed capital. And as I mentioned, I don't know why our question mark is cut in half, but if you will, we have selling materials at our booth later on, and I'll be happy to address any questions in English, Swedish, Danish, whatever. I'm happy that you took interest in coming here. I should mention that we use Avanza Bank as selling agent here in Sweden. Thank you.
Tack Jakob. Välkommen ni över hit, så ska vi ställa lite frågor.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for the presentation. And I think it's that camera who is watching us. So thank you very much. I think it was a very interesting presentation, an interesting company. And I would like to open to the floor. Are there any questions to Jakob? Yes. Du kan ta det på svenska.
Jag förstod att det här är en intressant metod i biomarknadsforskning.
får jag bara upprepa. Vilka andra möjligheter finns det att mäta den här biomarkören?
Ja, precis. Jag förstår att det är biomarkören i sig som är den stora uppfinningen. Ni har er teknologi att mäta den.
Ja, ja men det är korrekt. Our patent estate protects us by ways of measuring this in a clinical setting. So the patents are not preventing anyone from doing another antibody-based assay towards SUPAR. So there are 3 to 4 competitors out there who are just doing research use only. But I've actually had inquiries from a couple of them asking for a license because they would infringe on our patents if they provided for clinical use, measuring what we've taken out patents on, i.e. type 2 diabetes, cancers, COPD, etc., and the use in the emergency field now with the most recent. So it's a little bit different to the molecule-based patents that you see in the biotech life science area. We have what is known as method of use. So the method to use this product by ways of measuring said diseases. That's how we are protected. So anyone who comes out with a claim to the acute medical fields and about measuring some of the patented diseases that we've prognosticated, I would say they infringe on our patents. But also to address or elaborate a little bit further on the scope, there are obviously also methods in place today. So the doctors currently use physiological scoring systems to prognosticate who goes in, and more diagnostic-oriented assays, such as CRP, for instance. We have, however, established that those types of products are not as good as prognosticating an outcome. So they're an okay sort of balance sheet measurement right now of what is currently going on with this patient, but they're not very good at prognosticating what is going to happen in 30 days. And that's why our product is actually very interesting to add to that suite of products.
Okay, so I think that was one of my main questions when I read about the company. Today, or long history, we have this Senka, the lowering test, and I guess most people in Sweden know that. And then for the last, I would say 10-15 years, we have the CRP, which is a quicker way of having a picture of the inflammation state or infection state. But you say now that your product can actually look around the corner.
Yeah.
So how is that possible?
Well, it's possible by ways of saying the kinetics of the two products are very different, and the biology around how they evolve. So when you're talking CRP, it's more related clearly to infection. So if you have an ongoing infection, the CRP goes up very rapidly, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the patient is in threat of a serious life conditioning issue. So if you were to admit everyone with a high CRP, you would get common infections into the ward that needn't be there. Whereas SUPAR has a little bit of a slower kinetic, so it's not really a diagnostic marker, but it's much better at prognosticating the outcome. Okay. And we've done several studies with thousands of patients where we always establish that SUPAR is superior in terms of prognosticating an outcome to CRP.
Okay. Any further question from the floor? Yeah. Go ahead.
But the business model is how much is a license and how much is a single sell-out product, and what's the basic thinking of the business model?
So how much is in the business model net sales comes from licensing or sales of products?
Yeah. I'm glad you addressed that issue because it's quite pivotal. In terms of rolling out this in Europe, it's actually something that we can oversee ourselves. We have 21 acute medical functions in Denmark. We have 500 in Spain, about 800 in Germany. So it's an overseeable market, and that's why we are raising the capital to employ not the sort of Pfizer type of sales forces, but targeted sales forces by ways of 2 to 5 individuals to cover markets, and we can do that, and so that's going to be direct sales for the majority, and then selected markets we are going to address by ways of distributors. But the US that I didn't mention too much is going to be a partnered model, because that's going to be too big a market for us to address directly. So we're going to go in with a partnered licensed model there, where we are targeting some of the big integrated healthcare providers like the Blue Cross, Kaiser Permanente, and so on, that sees an interest in better triaging their patients.
From the memorandum, I saw that one instrument, and the customer needs one instrument, a reader.
Yeah.
You charge 1,825 euros.
Actually, we typically place it.
Okay.
So we don't.
There is no revenue on placing the instrument.
No.
So a kit of disposable tests contain 25 tests. Mm-hmm. And you sell 25 tests for 500 euros. How many? And then that means that one test costs 20 euros.
Yes.
How many kits do you need to sell per year to have a possible cash flow? Because you burn 10 million.
Yeah, roughly. We're going to increase the burn initially by ways of employing more people, but as we've guided also in the prospectus, we need about 40 paying customers with a higher burn rate to go break even. The customers comes in different sizes, if you like. Yeah. There are small hospitals, there are big hospitals. Typically, the small ones would do about 100 tests per day.
100 tests per day.
Yeah, okay. And the bigger ones would do 300 to 400. So it varies, and we've modeled bottom up, if you like, by ways of looking at both small and medium and large size hospitals, and then we've deployed a model in the rollout map that I showed in terms of the acquisition of customers.
Okay.
But the ones that we work with in Spain right now, the 10 customers, they come in right about the size that I mentioned here.
Okay. And will you place the instrument forever, or will you place the instrument the first year and then charge for it?
It depends. If they sign up to a certain amount of tests, then we can place the instrument free of charge, because it's much easier than coming into the procedures of acquiring new instruments. It's much easier to come in with the disposables.
Yeah, of course. And this is a volume business.
It's a volume business, yeah. Yes.
Okay. Any further questions? I have one last question. The home market, is it a simple whole blood test? Or does the person need to have a centrifuge at home?
Right now, we're not targeting the home market.
Okay.
When we get to the home market, we need to develop the test further for a whole blood. Okay. Or also a centralized procedure. If you know the American market, you can go down to the Walgreens and the CVSs and so on, and get your blood drawn, and you just tick the boxes of what you want measured. That's also an option. It depends very much on the individual markets. That's a big thing in the US. You virtually don't see it in Denmark. I don't think you see it to any notable degree in Sweden either at this current stage, but this market is going to change dramatically over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jakob.
Thank you.
Very nice presentation.
Thank you.